So, Linda? I tried to listen to the streaming from a class the other night, and there are 2 hours of beautiful video without sound. So, everything is helpful. On the theme of purification, if we look to see kind of the dimensions of what there are to be purified, what's there are, in order to have kind of a robust view of it, kind of the full panorama, it can be helpful, I think, to think about the 2 obscurations. Because if we think only about certain kind of active faults of thought or behavior, we're really only talking about one of the 2 obscurations. We're talking about the obscurations related to all our karmic patterns in our behavior, the kleshas, the mental poisons, and the activities that flow from that. That's sort of one side of it. And if we think only in those terms, it can feel like we would get rid of everything and then we'd be down to 0 because there isn't anything else. But there's the other side, what is variously called the obscuration to knowledge or the obscuration of knowledge, both of which are kind of it's good to see both sides of what's meant there. This is the obscuration of not recognizing nature of mind, the obscuration of not recognizing the nature of phenomena, nature of appearances. So you could say it's the obscuration to knowing, to being able to see in this way. You could also say that it's the obscuration of thinking we know how things are. The 2 are really the same thing in the end. So when we're doing the Vajrasattva practice and we're being filled with nectar, we can have the more we kind of keep in the back of our minds that we're actually looking for purification of both obscurations. Then it's a broader, that actually covers the panorama. And at the beginning, it can feel like, well, I mean, if you just keep those 2 in mind, that's pretty good. The obscuration of /to knowledge and the obscuration of the kleshas, karmic habits, those 2. But then it can feel like those are really kind of, how are those, they're 2 separate things. They're kind of disconnected things, it feels like. And from this perspective, I think it's actually worth going into it just a little bit more, and we'll go from the 2 obscuration to the 4 veils. Because that is more like something that breaks down the process a little bit. So it goes from basically the veil of seeing the nature of mind, just not recognizing, lack of recognition. Based on that lack of recognition, that's the first veil. Then you have the second veil, which translated variously, but like the veil of latent conditioning. Well, okay, that made it really clear, didn't it? But the veil that once not recognizing mind, then the projection of a sense of experience as one thing and an experiencer as a different thing. The basic engine of duality, of that kind of dualistic split. And so that's the second one. The third one is the variously translated, but it's the engine of the kleshas of wanting stuff, not wanting stuff. Amongst the stuff that the appearances, then trying to, the general impulse to want to get certain kinds of things and to want to be away from certain kinds of things, and the elaboration of that into all the jealousy, pride, anger, lust, all these kinds of different, the whole mix. So that's the third one. And then the fourth one is basically karmic patterning, the veil of karmic patterning, where this then elaborates into all the intermixture of thoughts and ideas and self-conceptions and actions and behavior, kind of this general. It's you take the show on the road. You take this calamitous truck that's sparked by lack of recognition, and then driven by trying to make it work, trying to make the dualistic thing work, and trying to make the dualistic thing work. Then there's some stuff's good and some stuff's bad, and then it just goes into a ball of karmic patterning. So that's kind of a gradation. So you start with the two obscuration, which we like to have things simple, but sometimes things are too simple. It's like the explanation of the four thoughts is too simple when it's boiled down too far. You need some more elaboration. So the four veils are an elaboration of the two obscurations, you could say. And along with the four veils, to kind of to go then into the realm of the experience of dissatisfaction and suffering, then there are the teachings on the three you could say three types of suffering, three ranges of suffering, and the coarse one is the suffering. It's called suffering of suffering, and that's all the stuff that you just go, yep, that's it. Oh, there's another one. That's it. And we'd all nod and say, yep, another train wreck, another karmic train wreck. And we'd all agree, it's like, oh, no, I don't. Does anybody volunteer to have a broken leg? No, didn't think so. Okay. So the suffering of suffering. The suffering of change is more subtle. And it's on the coarser edge of it, it's I thought I had something pretty good, and then it ran out. It broke, it ran out, it stopped working. So just that being confronted with that. As you look more closely at it, it becomes more a matter of grasping after, placing your bet on things that are fundamentally unstable. And there's a certain kind of tension that's involved in that, because we actually know, we have some sense, this is not stable. This is not actually dependable. And when I'm placing my my sense of well-being, the burden for my well-being on circumstances that are unstable. So there's a little bit of an edge to it, just in that. So even in the midst of what we'd call positive or happy circumstances, there's this little edge. And the more we can see into our processes, the more we can see that edge. Going even farther in that direction of subtle appreciation, then we have what's called the suffering of conditioned existence, sometimes the suffering of conditioning, just the fact of being lost in this realm of grasping after things, just the notion that we're just stuck in this circumstance, this continued circumstance. And at the nut of that, then we get all the way back to the origin of the four veils. So in a certain way, the three types of suffering, the four veils, you're kind of going da 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 da, and then with the three suffering, da 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 da, going back down to that fundamental ignorance. And just the suffering, you could say it's sort of at the level of the second veil, the suffering of this, the discomfort of just feeling like you just haven't quite got it right. There's some sense of not quite having it right. So those, I think those are worth keeping in mind, to have a sense of the spectrum of when we're doing the active practice. Is that kind of, are those helpful maps to have? Yes, Bruce.
The three forms of suffering that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to rectify that with the Four Noble Truths of Suffering. They're the same, right?
Yeah, that's all in the First Noble Truth.
Okay.
Yeah. The First Noble Truth is just the truth that all that stuff's going on. All those forms of suffering are there. Did that answer the question? I mean, is that okay? It's right behind you. It snuck up on you.
So, I love that you've brought us here, but now I feel like I might get stuck here, and so I want to go back to the positive. the positive parts of purification that you started with.
Mm.
Because I feel like in the Vajrasattva practice, I'm like, I'm marinating around in these veils and in the three types of suffering. I mean, I'm just cooking in there and can feel it, and sometimes see some, like, oh, here I am. Look at the dualism. Wow. So I want to, maybe it's just stating it out loud. I just want to remember, because I wasn't remembering the positive parts of it. So I just want to intertwine those things with this practice. Yeah.
Well, if you can actually take the whole piece, say, ooh, now you've given me four veils to work with. I was like, God, I got three more than I thought I had. But on the other hand, you can look into the practice itself and say, all of those. Even there is a way in which there's a lot that goes on in our mind stream, in our patterns and whatnot, that we can't exactly put our finger on. And not being able to put our finger on it, it can feel kind of frustrating as to like, I feel like I'm stuck somehow, but I don't know how I'm doing it. Like this, this is the magic trick. I've been watching The Magician carefully. I even snuck around backstage. I still can't figure out how the magician is pulling this off. So, you just you just let go of all of that. You just filled completely with the positive, with the sense, and then all the things that come out, all the various things that are visualized coming out, all the stuff's just coming out. But the core, the container, is 100% positive. So, and when we put this on, put the four veils into the mix, it's not just the things that I know I see. I can let go beyond that by being able to allow myself to be completely kind of in this sphere of influence, the kind of under the sphere, in the sphere of influence of Vajrasattva, and completely filled with that, and to always finishing the practice with that sense of kind of really, that's it, and Vajrasattva dissolves into us, and then the whole thing just dissolves. So in each of those, and those then can feel more like it's a kind of a, there are no characteristics, but going from that place of sort of this completely filled with the positive, blissful nectar, and kind of letting that go into space. It's a different place. It's a different place to rest. And then what arises out of that, then bang, there we are. But just as in Chenrezig practice, we don't try to go back to the way things were. Kind of we arise. Kind of here we are. Here's my fresh start. It's interesting that you related to the four veils as sort of like, it's like three more things to go, where I thought, oh, man, that is so cool. Even the stuff that I couldn't even put my finger on, kind of let that wash away, kind of be completely pervaded by this thing.
I wonder, it seems like there's this concept living underneath it that I don't get to feel that way.
Oh, I'm not allowed?
Right, like it doesn't have words to it. It's just this, like if a belief could have no words to it. Right, so then it's like, whoa, like fighting, dueling, dueling concepts,
Yeah. Things that feel really stuck like that. I was looking at that kind of in this practice recently and thinking about my impulse is to want to make those things kind of, I realize I'm fighting against it. In my equivalent was certain kinds of physical sensations that I wish I was rid of, but don't feel like I can be rid of. Like it's just like, old age, stiffness, and death. Emphasis on the stiffness right now. It's like, I wish that would go away. And doing the practice and realizing that I just like, get it, go, shoo, shoo. It's not going anywhere. But just to allow the nectar just to go into whatever that was, not to get rid of it, but just to allow it to go in. And abandoning the kind of subtle violence. There's a subtle aggression and violence that I don't want things, and it's not just I don't want things to be the way they are, it's I don't want things to be the way they are. It's kind of this, there's a kind of harshness in it. And of course, if I'm doing something really dumb with my posture, maybe I should sit up straight or do whatever, kind of let go of whatever I can let go of. But there's certain things that are not going to, I can't put my finger on the way to just unravel it and make it go away. And so there, it's like, there we are, yeah. But in this case, we kind of actively allow the nectar just to permeate. Phil.
I was struck when you talked about the obscuration of not recognizing the nature of mind, or of thinking we know how things are. And maybe you didn't mean this, but it just made me think, well, yeah, I mean, we're always struggling for that sort of tentative understanding, like, oh yeah, I got it, okay, emptiness, I understand, non-duality, I got it. I mean, that, we kind of reaching these plateaus of sort of conditional understanding and getting it straight in our mind, but is that kind of an obscuration that we've got it figured, so it's not a it's not a perplex anymore? And
we should treat all those things as kind of provisional assists.
Yeah, like little pieces of the wreckage that we're clinging to.
Well, yeah, I think we can be kinder about it than that. It's like when we first, if we hear something about whatever philosophical principle it is, if we hear something and then we get some leverage with it, with sort of some kind of metaphor comes to our mind, we go, oh, that's kind of like this, and something becomes more workable. So that's good. But we should treat all of those as provisional, as opposed to going out and getting the spray concrete kit and hosing down the form of our provisional metaphor, turning it into this great big concrete structure, and then we paint it, and then we invite people to come to see it, and it's like we have to have a lighter sense about our understandings.
Kind of like science.
Yeah. Yes.
Helpful hypotheses.
Yeah. Just like, oh, this is a clearer understanding than I had before. But it's not. It's I'm still just kind of holding on to things in a conceptual way that perhaps allows me to make better decisions, allows me to settle my mind in a more relaxed way. Whatever the provisional metaphor allows you to do, appreciate that, but then do the thing that it allows you to do, as opposed to going back to say, now I've got it. I've got the package.
So that you kind of lose that openness, that beginner's mind.
Yeah. The more we can use those openings to actually create a space for more openings, the better it is. And we'll never be perfect about it. We'll think we've really got it, and we haven't. But it was useful a little bit. But we did become a little bit too attached to it. Perhaps like somebody like me who talks a lot, I became very attached to saying a certain thing in a certain way, and it sounded so clever in my own mind, and I just got very wrapped up in it.
There is a kind of materialism, isn't there,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
thinking, I got it.
Yeah,
I'm going to put this under my pillow at night.
yeah, yeah. But, have some humor about it. Humor, relaxation, keep opening.
It's on.
It's fine.
So, this is probably one of my variations of practice, and I did this both with the refuge tree and also now with this one, but kind of like in the idea of being in touch with your Buddha nature, right? I go, well, I'm just doing this practice, but if I'm really in touch with my Buddha nature, and kind of like the idea at the end of our practices where we offer up the merit until all beings are a part of Mahamudra, and I would do this in refuge. I'd go through the cycle of, my parents, my teachers, my relatives, and I'd invite them to practice with me. So I would do a set, and I'd be doing it with, person A, and, if I really were in touch with my Buddha nature, I could invite them in. And similarly, like with this Vajrasattva practice, of course, there's probably a lot of purification needed. But if there should be some excess or whatever, I try to, because there are these, I have a wonderful mandala of Vajrasattva that I got from the library with these beams, coming out of Vajrasattva's heart center. And so I kind of imagine them like going, well, I'm full, go somewhere else in the universe where this is needed. So I don't know if that would help you kind of go, hey, as I'm doing this, I'm in touch with my Buddha nature, and kind of like Lojong, where I'm like giving and taking for different beings. I invite them into my practice. So I don't know if it may not be, if there's such an idea of kosher in Buddhism, it may not be kosher, but
Well, everybody's got some version of kosher. And in the case of this practice, it's just whatever's in the outline. And then the other things, there's some things where we find out after some time, actually, I'd always treated these two ways of doing something as kind of interchangeable. But no, it actually turns out there is a difference settling into one as opposed to the other. So there are little subtle differences. The notion that Vajrasattva can go somewhere else, you could also say you could have infinite Vajrasattvas. Vajrasattva doesn't need to stop. It doesn't need, I guess you're done right now. I think I'll go to Sponge. Oh, no, Sponge. Oh, now, oh, no, you're losing it. I better go back. So just the notion of, that impulse to bring others to mind. That's not a central focus of Vajrasattva practice, but you could say that's part of the peripheral vision. Just as I am going through this purification, so too all beings are going through this purification.
I think part of that motivation comes from the first part, right, where we're going, it's not just me, it's all sentient beings.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Sometimes in some practices it's very explicit that you should actually hold sentient beings, and then there are different ways that you relate to that within Yidam practice. But in this case, it's more like that's what we hold in our kind of our peripheral vision. It's just like I can have a conversation with you, and I'm fairly certain that everybody else is still in the room. But I don't need to Can you hold your thought for a second? I need to make sure everybody else is still here. It has that sense to it. Are there any other general questions? Just one. Yes, please.
This is not a caveat emptor question, but I purchased a Thangka in the bookstore of Vajrasattva, and he's blue. But everywhere else I read, he's white. He's got a white body. So I'm wondering which Vajrasattva I purchased.
Yeah, it's the Vajradhara Vajrasattva. Holding Dorje and bell like this. Okay, Vajradhara. Yeah.
So Vajrasattva is over to your left.
Yeah, that's Vajrasattva there.
He has a bell in his left hand and a dorje in his right.
Holding.
You were swindled.
Now, of course, it's time to tell at least one of that many classic Tibetan stories about how this is, we could say, it's all perfect anyway. So you could use that and practice Vajrasattva, and then you could have not brought this up, and this session could have been the last that you heard of Vajrasattva instruction. You could have gone off and been inspired and practiced for 20 years and attained actually profound realization, and come back and found me in my decrepit old age and thanked me profusely. And in the meantime, my practice has gone to pot, and I'm just kind of barely creaking along and holding my own. And you've obviously, and then I said, oh, well, what instruction was that? What practice? And you say, Vajrasattva. I say, how does that go? Well, it's the blue one. I say, no, it's not blue, it's white. And then all of a sudden, your practice dissolves. But there are stories like this in the Tibetan tradition of somebody who, the person who was stuck at the back of the crowd and couldn't quite hear the instructions and got the mantra all wrong and different things, but then went off and actually had time to practice, and the teacher didn't have time to practice because the teacher was so busy, and the student excelled the teacher by leaps and bounds, in spite of having completely misunderstood the actual instructions. So, if you want a Vajradhara Thangka, it sounds like you have one. If you really want Vajrasattva, then probably exchange it.
In a nutshell, what's the significance of Vajradhara?
Vajradhara is, in a nutshell, I think the person who holds that nut in the shell is the Buddha and not me. Vajradhara in a nutshell is the Buddha. Is the Buddha in a nutshell. Holding the Vajra and the bell is the gesture of the union of relative and ultimate bodhicitta, so the relative in insight and loving kindness and compassion. And in the lineage pictures with the refuge, Vajradhara is the one in the middle, and that one is the form is Vajradhara, but the identity is the identity of our personal root teacher. So Vajradhara shows up there. And then you have all the lineage teachers above, going back to Vajradhara. So you could say that sometimes the term primordial Buddha, primordial expression of Buddha.
It's in the Book of Prayers, may I soon attain the state of Vajradhara.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. Kiewa kuntu yandal lamadan, drame chiki bela lonje, sadan lonje, doji changi gopan yoto so. Yeah, well, Vajradhara shows up all over the place. Yeah. Well, shall we go through the practice just to make sure that the details? And who doesn't have an outline of the? Somebody can borrow this one. Yeah, it's the notes for practice. Okay. Some that are. Yeah. We're going to go through the Vajrasattva practice. So, having the outline and the Mudra text are the pieces needed for the. In the outline, you have to shuffle through the pictures of the refuge if you have the full outline. Otherwise, it begins with a page that looks like that. The Pam, Hum, and the Vajra. So let's just read together page 1, the window. Glorious and precious root Lama, who sits on a lotus and moon seat on the crown of my head, having accepted me through your great kindness, please grant the realization of enlightened body, speech, and mind. And here, in this case, it's Vajradhara, on the crown of our heads. In essence, and His Holiness Karmapa suggested at this point that we actually think that we're receiving empowerment. So either on the crown of our heads or in space in front with the white light from the forehead striking our forehead, red light from throat striking our throat, the blue light from the heart center striking our heart center. So receiving the body speech, mind empowerment from Buddha Vajradhara. So we begin sort of leaping into this frame of being empowered. Then recalling the reflections on precious human existence, death and impermanence, karma, the defects of samsara, whether we recite the outline or whether we just reflect on one point, or good to balance going into more into one point versus making sure that you keep some overview of all 4 points. And then depending on what refuge prayer, refuge and bodhicitta prayer that you like, the brief one that's in the Mahamudra program book that we did to start out, or whether you want to do the actual the 6 branch refuge prayer and the bodhisattva vow that's in the Wandro text in the refuge section, you can do that. But in any case, always beginning with the empowerment, some reflection on the 4 thoughts, and then refuge and bodhicitta. So then we go to page 19. And on the outline, you can see that there's a little piece that is in the practice, but it's not actually in the recitation. Usually these pieces of practice that aren't in the recitation are handled in what's called the yikchung, or literally the little letters. But in this case, there is no. It's only in the commentaries where you'll find the instruction. And in this case, we're building the visualization. We're beginning to set the stage for Dorje Sempa Vajrasattva's presence on the crown of our head. We imagine a white syllable pam, which changes into a white lotus. A white syllable a above the lotus, which changes into a flat moon disk. Then a white hum standing on the lotus and the moon becomes a 5-pronged vajra, just a usual vajra, marked by a hum at the center. There's a little sphere in the center of the vajra. Light radiates all directions, and at first we have the sense that this radiance benefits all sentient beings, touches all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as an offering. The light returns, and then the Vajra transforms in an instant into the form of Dorje Sempa. In this case, we're holding a sense of Dorje Sempa inseparable from the Buddha in essence, inseparable from our root teacher. In terms of description, Vajrasattva is white, 1 face and 2 arms. The right hand holds a 5-pronged golden Vajra at his heart. Gesture like that, holding the Vajra. The left hand holds a silver bell upturned at his hip. Wearing silk garments, but some Bogakaya, the silk skirts, the jewels, the necklace, the crown. Above Vajrasattva's head is a blue form of the Buddha. Sakshobhya, the lord of the family that Vajrasattva belongs to. And in most tankas you'll find sitting in lotus posture with the legs crossed, but for the practice, the right leg is extended over the lotus and Vajrasattva's foot rests on the crown of our head. As with all visualization practices, in this imagined form, Vajrasattva is brilliantly present, but just like a rainbow. It's marked by Om Ahum at the forehead, white Om at the forehead, red Ah at the throat, and blue Hum at the heart. And here we can then recite. This is when the recitation would begin, so we could recite together. Above the crown of my head, upon a lotus and moon seat, is Lama Dorjsempa, white in color and wearing ornaments. He has one face and two arms. He sits cross-legged with his right hand holding a vajra and the left the bell. And in this case, even though the next section, the little letters there, I ended up reciting those just because they were so succinct and descriptive of the stage of the practice, but it's not necessary, formally speaking, to recite them. But at this point, light radiates from his heart, invokes the wisdom deities who are absorbed into him. As we meditate that Dorje Sempa is the essential embodiment of the rare and sublime ones. I have memorized still the first Mundro text, so if I take my eye off for a second, I find I'm saying something else that's not on the page, so excuse me. But in this case, so there's Dorje Sempa, and light radiates, and the term here, the Yeshepa, or wisdom deities, we may have some sense that we have actually fabricated this visualization. So to let go of the sense that this is our personal creation, we invoke the blessings of the enlightened ones, or the wisdom beings. We invoke the presence of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so we can then, at this point, the light enters Dorje Sempa, and we consider then this is truly Dorje Sempa. This is no different than being in the presence of the Buddha. We may have sufficient confidence that we don't feel like, that we need this step. But sometimes we might not have that confidence, so it's helpful. And at this point, then in the heart center of Vajrasattva, white home appears, and circling that is the 100-syllable mantra. And if you really want to develop your shamatha and have something kind of a project to sink your teeth in, you can learn to write the whole 100-syllable mantra in Tibetan, memorize the form, or even just kind of mentally write it out in your mind. And imagine it starting, there's the hum, and then Om Vajrasattva Samayam Anam. It spirals around. It doesn't move, it's just arranged in that way. And then we have brief supplication we can do together. Lama Dorje Sempa, please cleanse and purify all harmful acts, obscurations, faults, and transgressions that I and all beings, limitless as the sky, have accumulated. So there we have mentioned the obscurations, harmful actions, obscurations, faults and transgressions, so we have a little bit more context for some of those words. And then here, actually, you could say this is where the hum, responding to this prayer, the hum and the mantra appear. And through this prayer on a moon disk in Dorje Sempa's heart center, the letter hum appears, surrounded by the 100-syllable mantra. A stream of nectar flows from the syllables, descends from his form, enters the crown of my head, filling my body. All harmful actions, obscurations, faults, and transgressions are purified. And then it's we do the recitation of the mantra. And here in the edition of the text that I have, this is the Tibetan version of the pronunciation. So there is a Sanskrit version. No, not in this edition. You have both? Okay. Mine's a slightly older one, so you have both there. So you can choose the Solnius Karmapa has encouraged people to, instead of approximating the Tibetan approximation of the Sanskrit, to approximate the Sanskrit in approximate English-speaking people approximating Sanskrit. So that was his recommendation. Yeah, the more directly approximate Sanskrit version. If you're just starting out, if you have been practicing for a long time, then it may be that you don't want to change. Cynthia has an appointment, so thank you for coming. YouTube can help. So can recordings as well. Yeah, but at some point I had grown up, you could say, with the Om Vajrasattva Samaya, but I actually made a decision that I was going to transition, and it was during a winter retreat, and it took the better part of 2 weeks to shift gears. So if you've started one way, just realize that it would take time and some patience and persistence to shift. But if you're just starting out, just using the Om Vajrasattva Samayam instead of the Benzo Sato, probably a good place to start. So reciting the mantra, and this is the core of the practice. And here, as we're reciting the mantra, our body is filled with nectar. You can do this over and over again, or just fill and just rest in the sense of being filled while reciting the mantra. So however many recitations of the mantra we recite, and as we recite, the nectar coming from the big toe, the foot of Vajrasattva, entering through our body, filling our form, and then just a sense of naturally through all our pores, through all the orifices of the body, all dark, whether it's a sense of dark smoke or liquids, and there are all kinds of examples that just whatever comes out naturally is. They've used various forms of insects, kind of all sort of nasty stuff, tar, pus, blood, whatever. You don't have to do any particular one of those, but just some sense that, just like being in a sauna, kind of breaking a sweat in a sauna, this is just coming out. But it's just like as in a sauna, we don't have to try to make the sweat come out. Just by virtue of becoming hot, it happens. In this case, just by virtue of being filled with the nectar. This just flows out and flows away. One of the details in the visualization is seeing ourselves on a vast golden ground, and then being anything that comes out is just absorbed, just disappears into this vast golden expanse. So we do this, reciting this over and over again. Sometimes we can shift our attention. You're talking about the presence of other beings. Sometimes we can just make sure that we acknowledge the presence of other beings, and that the same process is happening for them. So sometimes just shifting attention a little bit, but it can suffice that we can just have a sense of complete confidence that just as I am being purified, so too are all other beings. In the outline, it goes through the four powers. As we conclude the long mantra, we can do the short mantra. And there are various instructions on this. What we heard from Lama Tinley is the same number of long mantras that you recite, the same number of short mantras. So if it's 100, 100. You can also hear the instruction that you should recite the short mantra 100 times for each, however many syllables there are in the mantra. So 600 times. But the notes here say an equal number of times. And that's the instruction that Dora and I got from Lama Tinley. And when we're reciting the extended mantra, then we can have more of an active sense that purification process is an ongoing thing. It's kind of ongoing purification. And then with the short mantra, that's when we just rest with a sense that the purification has happened, and we're overflowing with the nectar is just completely overflowing, we're completely filled, and just resting in that and reciting the short mantra. And then there are a very short set of prayers at the end. With a yes.
The short mantra is just the Om Vajrasattva Om?
Yes. Yeah. Om Vajrasattva Om. Yeah. So that's not actually that's not 6 syllables that go at the end of the long mantra. Yeah. Then there's the brief prayer at the end, together. Protector, through ignorance and delusion, I have transgressed my sacred commitments and broken them. Lama protector, give me refuge. O Lord, holder of the Vajra, you personify great compassion. Lord of beings, I take refuge in you. I openly confess all the root and branch commitments of body, speech, and mind, which I have violated and broken. Please grant your blessing that all harmful actions, obscurations, faults, and transgressions be cleansed and purified. Dorje Sempa gives assurance, melts into light, and merges with me. We become indivisible. So the dissolution is very similar in flavor to any of the Vajrayana dissolution stages, where you let go of any intention, just having let go of the visualization, being completely focused on the visualization, then the merging, and then just letting that dissolve with a sense of complete unity with Vajrasattva. There's not actually something to do other than rest briefly in that way. And then, as with all practices, there's the dedication, and we can save that for the end of practice session today, whenever we're done. So in terms of the practical instructions, is it relatively clear? Is it clear in all details? You have 2 microphones.
Hey, hey. Here, we got that. Once we build the visualization of Vajrasattva on our crown, during the mantra, do we want to keep going up there and seeing the visualization in detail? Or is it just like focusing on the nectar, filling, being full?
It's primarily focusing on the nectar, but as with all practices of this type, it's good to occasionally refresh, just sort of go kind of top to bottom, and to allow the mind to kind of rest on the different elements of the form of Vajrasattva. The presence of Vajrasattva is the central sense, and the experience of the purification. That's sort of the central piece. So it's good not to allow some sense of fastidiousness to think, oh, I should, if you're really in the groove with it, then don't let that kind of a fastidious impulse, you gotta cut that out. But it's good on occasion, just to go through and refresh. Particularly if the mind is moving a lot, sometimes it's helpful to let the mind sort of move from one aspect to another aspect in the visualization. And sometimes you can also, again, sort of have some sense of all the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, kind of refreshing. So you sort of, yeah. If it goes a little, if you feel it's gone a little flat, to kind of, bring the energy back. Use some method to bring the energy back.
I found it interesting where I finding myself doing, like, concentrating on the visualization or some part of the visualization and realizing that the mantra is kind of on autopilot, which is interesting. It's just, I'm saying it and I'm like, oh, that's great. So, I did say one other thing I found helpful, for me at least, was finding the English translation or a couple of versions of the 100-syllable mantra. Because they're really, and I don't have my notebook with me, but it's, there's some wonderful sentiments in that as well.
Yeah, it doesn't have one translation. It's actually, the Tibetans never translated it. And there was a reason that they didn't translate it, which was to avoid literalizing it. And I've never, if you asked me, I could not provide you with it. I never made an effort. I was never encouraged to, nor did I make an effort to actually learn. But I have heard that it's true, exactly what you said, that there's all kinds of good stuff in there. Yeah. It's not like if you knew Sanskrit, you would know all kinds of elements of meaning in it. So it's not like it was verboten to understand the meaning of the Sanskrit. But usually with mantras, the impulse to translate them usually makes the sense of it collapse into one thing or another thing. And particularly when we start adding prepositions and things and articles that don't exist to try to make it into a sentence. And like the translations of Om Mani Padme Hum, which do that, I need Dramamine when I see some of those. It's not that not that kind of the basics of the words and the meaning are not there, but when you start to turn it into a particular English sentence, then it gets kind of funny, because it. Just to use the example of the Chenrezig mantra, there's the Mani Kabum is a book of the 100,000 meanings of the Mani. So it's kind of like we get in a big rush to translate something. You think, oh, I've got it really, okay, let's see. There's probably some here in the 100,000, someplace, something like it, but that's, there's so many more possibilities. Most Tibetan texts, I remember Bokar Rinpoche, the story about Bokar Rinpoche that Ngordrup told after he had spent a little time with His Holiness 17th Karmapa after he'd come out of Tibet, and His Holiness had written something, and Ngordrup was saying, oh, that's interesting. Oh, true, yes, no. And Bokar Rinpoche was just kind of talking as he was kind of reviewing what he was reading, and Ngordrup was saying, oh, yeah, there's that level of meaning. Oh, why are there 4 levels of meaning? And this was in something that you could actually translate. You know, it was not mantra, it was not, but there were these different levels of meaning that were clearly embedded in that, and that's one of the things that we can lose a little bit of that if we get kind of too hard about the meaning. It's easy to lose some of those things. But I'm not going to say, oh, you shouldn't do that. You should try to forget all that. No, to the extent that they're inspiring, you should kind of treat them as kind of stones of inspiration to kind of drop and let ripple out, and then it kind of has some opening sense.
Tiny question: how do you pronounce TVENOPA?
It's just
4 souls or 3 souls?
Tveinopa. That's again. This is an English speaker approximating something that I heard another English speaker say. You know, when Eric said, I said, well, what? Lama Namgyal asked me when I translated. I worked on a text, and I said, wasn't he Eric found the transliteration of this answer. I don't know how the TVA sounds. I don't know how that. But so it's just my best guess. Tvenopa. I don't know. Perhaps you're better at it. That kind of.
If the Sanskrit was written, then I could tell you what it is. But what is written over there is the Tibetan. So I can only translate the Tibetan.
Yeah, and the Tibetan is.
And I know, I mean, you know, Om Benzra. So Om Benzra is not Vajra Sattva. Vajra will, in Hindi, which is how you would write the Sanskrit, that would be written very differently. And it also sound differently. So it's interesting that you fixed on that one, because I was also wondering in my mind what that Sanskrit would look like.
The other, from my friends on YouTube, So from my friends on YouTube, I have to say, it sounds a lot like the Tibetan quite often with Vajrasattva, because I would write stuff down and I'd be like, what? And and at the same time, I think sometimes there are letters that might appear in this text, but they're silent.
Oh yeah.
So like that V may not be pronounced.
No, it is. Yeah. I mean, I can't write Sanskrit, but the difference between the Tibetan pronunciation of their transcription of the Sanskrit and a closer approximation of the Sanskrit from Sanskrit speakers, the closer approximation actually you can map to the way that the Tibetan is written. The Benzra, there's no there's nothing in the way that it's written in the Tibetan that you'll come up with a ben sound. The na is not there. It is ba, za, ra.
Yeah, I saw some
Vajra.
translation that was like, in that case it was like benza, benza.
Yeah, benza. Yeah, oh, benza is zami mama. Benza, yeah. Bedzra or benzra, as opposed to vajra. I mean, Tibetans, they don't do V sound, like no va. No va. Yeah. So in any case, this is the best approximation that I know of, and I'm sure somebody could do a better job of it than my trying to follow what somebody else said was a better job of it than what we'd done before. But again, this is like there have been generations that have mispronounced this in multiple different ways, and generations that have attained realization approximating it in different incorrect ways. So it's not the critical thing. What else? If any of you would like a little background reading on the 3 types of suffering, or the 4 veils, I found some things that I copied out for a study group some time ago. So if anybody wants to send me an email, I'll just email you those.
I have a different question about feeling like I'm not being successful in getting a lot of Chenrezi practice in a weekly way. I'm doing the morning, the blue book, and the
Wonder.
in the Nundro, yeah. Wondered if you had any suggestions. I'm not coming here on Wednesday nights with frequency. I'm also suspecting that it would be really good if I could get a little bit in every day or many days rather than just try and do a big chunk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any suggestions? I'm doing morning and then I'm doing evening, and many days I work 10 hours in between.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know the short form of the condensed root text for the Chenrezi. So if you use that, and even if you know the visualization, just reminding yourself of refuge, bodhicitta, praise in the mantra. And it is very good to memorize the page just before and just before the mantra. Yeah, because that one sets the view. And then the brief dedication. Recite the mantra, visualization, dissolution. And in this case, this is a if you're doing it briefly, then really kind of bringing everything kind of sort of vividly to mind during the dissolution dedication, as opposed to trying to that actually that can be more impactful than trying to do sort of drag it all out.
To that point, I've just found it in my own practice useful to end whatever I'm doing with Chenrezig, because most of the practices, calm abiding, insight, whatever, seem to leave me in a really good place to go into a Chenrezig visualization.
Mm-hmm.
And then that also gives me a good way to arise
Yes.
after practice and sort of re-enter the world. So it's just sort of my I don't know, sort of the cadenza at the end of whatever other practice I'm doing.
Your medley. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. So let's go to the dedication.
What page?
I'm about to. Yeah. I dedicate this virtue that all beings without exception reach the undying state of Vajra mind through the ever blissful union of means and wisdom. Traveling the inner Vajra path, may they attain the pinnacle of awakening. By this virtue, may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Through the blessing of the Buddhas who attained the three kayas, through the blessing of the unchanging truth of Dharmata, through the blessing of the unwavering intention of the Sangha, may this dedication and aspiration be fulfilled. Thank you. What's that? I'd say it's pretty good.
There's also one on Vajrasattva itself that I
Oh, yeah.
picked up. I don't know what it's on.
I haven't seen that one. I haven't looked at that one.